Hey guys. So she's up there for the time being because okay, I'll just say it. I stepped on a pair of scissors that were sticking straight up. These to be exact. Not terribly long ago. Like yay. And you know when you feel yourself stepping I was going to grab like a pair of pantyhose and I stepped, you step a foot down. And you know when you're stepping to the ground, you don't like tap it lightly. You completely step. It's like, until it stopped because it's like jammed in enough to like hit something deep enough to be and before I pulled it out my foot up, I'm like, yeah, I feel like I got stabbed in the foot. Like I don't feel like it was like a like really bad clothespins. My sister must have moved wherever I had jewelry. But like an earring post, it's like a little you ever step on it? Maybe not. And it's like, holy hell, that hurts. This is like worse. So anyway, I got blood all over my house, and I think she's concerned. And so she just like ran right in. It might be a little bit of selfishness though, like she's afraid I'll if I die, like who's gonna take care of her? So she's making sure. Or she could eat my corpse. I don't know. So that's why it's called well, there's another reason I called it unwellness, is because we're gonna finish our book today and start a new book called Wellness. Since like if I feel kind of bad calling it wellness, considering I like yikes my foot. Did get a tetanus shot not too long ago. I think it was only last year, so I don't think I'm gonna lose the foot. I'm just gonna paint my toe as well. Y'all come in. She's not a cat. Shut up. Um what I'm hoping is I don't have too much of a limp. I have to carry some files to that lawyer. This you see what I'm doing? The thread this week, and I don't want like a Play-Doh. I have the door open for the time being because look at and you want to know what else that's nail polish? You want to know what else um clumsy I did? It hurts really bad. So I go to grab some Tylenol from the kitchen, and I'm like a child. So I like the kind that are sweet, the sugar coating, and I'll drop one on the floor, and she's walking around because I'm faking blood everywhere, and I'm like, don't see it right away. But fortunately, those with the sugar coating, they're red. So and the floor is white tile, so it wasn't too long. I found where it rolled down to. But I was like, no, I'm not gonna let her eat some sweet flavored Tylenol. But it's just like, if it's not like it's not enough, one thing or another, Fortunately for me, this is not the first time I've gotten hurt. It's not the first time I've stepped on scissors. I've stepped on a nail actually before. So I'm not shocked. Yeah. Um, got my heart rate up a bit. But it will calm me down to so we're gonna finish the other book tonight. There's only around 20 pages left of it. And we definitely do more than that in a read. So this book, should I give you a little bit of I should give you a little bit of background, right? Let's give you a little synopsis before we start. Yeah, it's not going to be every night, but you got to deal with me in some shorts tonight because I didn't know if I should be putting the pantyhose over this because of the give it if it bleeds through or if it just looks stupid. I could put some lotion on my legs though. If it, as long as it doesn't get there. And, oh, and I have a Grateful Dead shirt on, so maybe it's fitting considering how my life is going. Okay, the book. Let's do it this way. This will give me a shorter. It only came out in 2023. A novel that explores the complexities of a marriage between Jack and Elizabeth, who meet in the 1990s Chicago art scene and navigate the challenges of adulthood, parenting, and aging over 2 decades. The book delves into themes of love, self discovery, and the impact of modern life, including technology and self help trends on relationships. And I thought that might be the most fun, is that it's going to be like, so, whatever of different decades of them, things like you maybe, would remember and how it fit, like, it's apparently, like, all kinds of themes, which and being very well written. I thought this would be a fun one because we can chatter about it. It hurts. I wonder if this is a bad sign, I took the 210 on everything, but even just ow, ow, pain. Anyway, I'll live. Let's go back to the well, I think just maybe start there. But apparently they even have that's pulling you guys up. They even have a section, I think, where it goes back like 150 years shortly to be like why these two and it's I think it'll be fun and it'll be a story. So which is a little change of pace. Um, we like to mix up our books here. Oh, you give me a hug. Thank you. Yeah. But I will keep you updated. Um, yeah, I think it should heal within a few days. And the pain should go away. We'll see. I don't want it to wake up tomorrow and I'm like, oh my god, my foot's the size of a basketball and it's really bad. Alright, let's not worry about that. Mhm. Alright, so where we left it last night. I forgot if you're gonna stay in here, maybe I close this. It's easier to read this way. Okay? Just don't bark, alright? Or knock over my coffee, okay? Yeah. Oh, and it's like 600 pages or something, so that would be fun. My feet up all these dry. We are on the final chapter in this series. Well, part 2 of the series, the Borgata. Chapter 30, and it's titled Convenient Corpses. In the years since the Warren Commission report was published, quite a few men who actually sat on the Warren Commission became its chief skeptics. Judge Bert Griffin, for example, said, we accepted the answers we got, even though they were inadequate and didn't carry the battle any further. To do so, we'd have had to challenge the integrity of the FBI. Well, yeah. Okay. Back in 1964, that was something we didn't do. This universal reluctance to challenge the Bureau began to erode. Yeah, I feel like that's pretty current too, though. Began to erode on the evening of May 2nd, 1972, when 77-year-old J. Edgar Hoover, who had been FBI director. Hold on, I'm just looking at something. Hmm. For over 40 years, let out his two terriers for a poop in his backyard and then dropped dead inside his house. Well, you know what? Let's see what's taking care of his dogs. Or terriers. Okay. Well, there we go. Ugh. President Nixon, who was still in office, publicly said of the all powerful director, it's, I'm just opening this, Emot. Calm down. Putting it in a cup. Of the all powerful director's passing, his death only heightens the respect and admiration felt for him across this land and in every land where men cherish freedom. While privately, Nixon said, "That old cocksucker, he's got files on everybody." In the hours after Hoover's death, only his personal secretary, Miss Helen Gandy, destroyed most of his secret files in the basement of his home, with the exception of 12 cardboard boxes, which she gave to Deputy Associate Director Mark Felt, later revealed to be the infamous Deep Throat who secretly helped journalist Bob Woodward break open the Watergate scandal that led to Nixon's resignation. Felt would also be charged with authorizing burglaries of the undestroyed files. Three folders disappeared, one of which bore the name of a top FBI official who was alleged to have deep connections to organized crime. The political information on key or um the others were considered very sensitive and explosive files containing political information on key figures in the country. Hoover passing heralded a major climate change in Washington, D.C., where Senator Frank Church of Idaho assembled the church committee to probe into, among other things, the relationship between the mafia and the CIA. The committee wanted to question a long list of people, including CIA Director Richard Helms, who admitted that his agency worked with the mob. The committee also targeted Johnny Roselli, who over the years had never lost contact with America's 007 Wild Bill Harvey. When the committee subpoenaed Roselli, he was worn down by legal battles that had begun in 1954 when his citizenship was questioned by the Immigration and Naturalization Service. At that time, Roselli lawyered up and used delaying tactics until 1961 when Bobby Kennedy launched a new and aggressive probe into Roselli with intent to lock him up, then deport him upon his release from prison. This second probe also petered out after President Kennedy was killed and Bobby left the Justice Department. By then, Roselli had other problems. After his name surfaced in the Giancana Rowan bugging affair, Hoover wanted to know what Roselli was doing with the agency, and in the course of his investigation, he uncovered Roselli's true identity. On the afternoon of May 5th, 1966, two FBI agents approached Roselli on a sidewalk in Beverly Hills, telling him they wanted to talk. Roselli politely told them to contact his attorney. As Roselli was walking away, one agent held an old photograph in front of his face. Roselli was stopped in his tracks, visibly shaken by the photo of a little boy with his mother. Filippo Sacco, said the agent, rattling Roselli, "We know where you were born and when you entered the United States." The cute, innocent 4-year-old boy in the photo bore little resemblance to the crafty, dangerous adult who oversaw Hollywood and Las Vegas for the Chicago mob. How the FBI had discovered that Roselli was not a Renaissance painter began with mobster Sal Piscopo. At least once a year, Roselli had Piscopo travel to Boston carrying a bag filled with cash for Roselli's elderly mother, Maria Sacca, who Roselli had not seen in over 30 years. One day, FBI agents followed Piscopo to the airport where he met with another man who took the cash and passed it on to Roselli's brother, Al Sacco, who finally delivered it to Roselli's mom. After the agents looked into Al Sacco, they pieced together the rest of the puzzle and caught up with Roselli in Beverly Hills, showing him the photo and telling him he could avoid deportation if he agreed to become a confidential informant. Roselli again told the agents to contact his attorney and shuffled away. The day after Roselli was approached by FBI agents, he booked a flight to Washington where he visited his retired CIA handler, Sheffield Edwards, asking him to get the FBI off his back. Edwards knew Roselli had the agency in an unusually vulnerable position, given its past relationship with the mob, but said there was nothing he could do to call off the implacable Hoover. Roselli then reached out to Wild Bill Harvey, who had even less pull than Edwards and had already been warned by the FBI to stay away from Roselli. Harvey ignored the warning, telling another agent, I don't turn my back on my friends, and Johnny is my friend. With the threat of deportation hanging over his head, Roselli finally called on his Washington based attorney, Edward Morgan, and explained to him all he had done for the CIA, adding, it's one thing in my life that I'm really proud of. Whatever we may think of Johnny Roselli, his patriotic love of country, attested to by multiple CIA agents, placed him in Hoover's crosshairs, and his eternal love for his mother, who he supported for decades, broke up the investigation. It is a curious trend in human affairs that our hearts often do us in. After conferring with his attorney, Roselli fired a warning shot across the government's bow by leaking tidbits of information to the press. Journalist Drew Pearson and his assistant, Jack Anderson, both known for uncovering political scandals, broke the story, which was framed as a political hit piece, accusing Bobby Kennedy, who was alive at the time, of directing the CIA's secret plot to eliminate Fidel Castro. Although Bobby denied being the maestro, he was admittedly distressed by the article and wasted no time for arranging lunch with CIA Director Richard Helms to assess the fallout and bury any files that might bear out his culpability. Roselli's bold gambit, though consistent with his daring nature, was an extremely dangerous move. He was threatening an all powerful government as well as the mafia. Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante did not want their CIA secrets aired out in the press and were displeased with Roselli, whose waning strength in the underworld was revealed when he asked for a contract on Sal Piscopo, who had betrayed him and his family when interrogated by the FBI. That and the contract was approved but never carried out means that Roselli was no longer worth avenging. The mob was, moreover, beginning to wonder if it made more sense to kill Roselli. The government did not back down, and Roselli was charged with a gambling indictment and a fraud case. accompanied by an increased effort to deport him. With no other cards to play, Roselli continued to leak damaging information to his attorney, telling him in a moment of extraordinary indiscretion that certain members of the same cabal who had tried to kill Fidel Castro had taken out President Kennedy, who was shot by several Cuban snipers who were sent to Dallas by Santo Trafficante. In May 1968, Roselli was convicted, and again in February 1969. At sentencing, Roselli's attorney made an impassioned plea for leniency based on Roselli's patriotic duty, which he was never paid for. The judge was unmoved. I don't think Mr. Roselli is entitled to brownie points, he said. I'm not going to concede that a court should give credit to a person who attempts the assassination of anybody. The judge then sentenced Roselli to a nickel, which feels like a dime at age 64. In February 1971, Roselli was sent to prison on McNeil Island in Washington state. Over the course of his lifetime, Roselli had been arrested over a dozen times, but had never served hard time until now. He did not adjust to prison life and was still anxious about being deported when, in a moment of desperation, he broke weak and agreed to testify before a grand jury looking into the mob's control of Las Vegas. Even though federal prosecutors promised to keep his appearance secret, and although Roselli gave them hardly anything of value while testifying, the government now had him by the balls. If they ever wanted him dead, they need only leak choice bits of his testimony. In early October 1973, the 68-year-old Roselli was released from prison early. Frightened of being deported, he again contacted journalist Jack Anderson and fed him more information about the government's dirty deeds, also confirming that the mob had ordered Jack Ruby to silence Lee Harvey Oswald. Roselli then flew to Plantation, Florida, where he moved into a guest room at the home of his sister, Edith Daigle, and her husband, Joe. Roselli lived the quiet life of a Florida retiree, mornings by the pool, afternoons on the golf course, and lazy evenings watching television. He complained about having no money, which was probably true. There is no doubt that millions of dollars had passed through Roselli's hands, but he lived high on the hog and had nothing to show for it. The reason he was crashing at his sister's house. In February 1974, Roselli was subpoenaed by the special prosecutor Leon Jaworski, who was investigating the Watergate scandal that toppled President Nixon and wanted to know if there was any connection between the Watergate burglars and the Bay of Pigs invasion, since Cubans and CIA agents were involved in both incidents. Jaworski's theory was that President Nixon had ordered the burglary to seize and destroy documents that connected him to the CIA and the mafia. Roselli's attorney, who was present when Roselli was questioned, said the theory was so convoluted you really had to be John Le Carre to follow it. Whether or not the theory was valid, Roselli denied any knowledge of it and returned to his sister's home in Florida. But the government knew. After Roselli had testified twice, they had a talker on their hands, which returns us to the church committee which subpoenaed Roselli in 1975. As expected, Roselli appeared yet again. He entered the building in a hand-tailored sport jacket with a leather attaché case, looking more like a Washington lobbyist than a mobster, if there is any difference between the two. Like everything else about Roselli, his testimony was a carefully balanced mix of truth and lies. As he exited the hearing room, the press was waiting for him with cameras flashing. One reporter asked him if he had any reason to fear for his life. Roselli shrugged and replied, "Who'd want to kill an old man like me? Santa Traficante, for starters." But the list was growing by the hour. The church committee had also subpoenaed Traficante, but unlike Roselli, Traficante knew how to dodge a subpoena. He fled to his vacation home in Costa Rica and ducked the summons. Sam Giancana was also called before the committee, and it is necessary to retrace his steps leading up to this moment we have done with Roselli. The relentless pressure Bobby Kennedy had put on Carlos Marcello, Sandro Trafficante, and Sam Giancana had eased up after the assassination of President Kennedy. By 1970, Aaron Cohn said that Marcello's Brigada still had corrupt collusion of public officials at every critical level, including police, sheriffs, justice of the peace, prosecutors, mayors, governors, state legislators, and at least one member of Congress, although there were more. In April, Life magazine ran an article headlined, "Louisiana Still Jumps for Mobster Marcello." Inside the article, Life reported that the 60-year-old Marcello controlled the state of Louisiana with little interference from local public officials or police, and indeed often with their help. As for Traficante, he resumed command over the state of Florida while living in a modest bungalow and driving around in an old sun-bleached car with rolls of coins in his pockets so he could conduct his business from public payphones. At night, Trafficante sat in his living room and read books from his longtime wife, or no, from across the across from his longtime wife who did the same. In contrast to the two smarter dons noted above, Giancana never abandoned his glitzy lifestyle and continued to attract attention from both the media and the FBI. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Which placed him under suffocating surveillance. Called him before grand juries and put the squeeze on everyone around him, including Murray the Camel Humphreys, who dropped dead from the pressure. In an unprecedented move for a mob boss, Giancana sued the government. Whoa. Claiming that the FBI's constant surveillance was a violation of his civil rights. A judge thought the complaint had legal merit, but Giancana's real judge, Anthony Joe Batters Accardo, saw Giancana's legal whining as a violation of omerta. An FBI memo indicated that Giancana was in an extremely tenuous situation because of publicity and may be replaced. As early as 1964, Accardo decided to come out of retirement, but held off on killing Giancana, figuring Giancana's legal problems would soon carry him off to prison and spare the Chicago mob a final round of publicity that would undoubtedly stem from his murder or disappearance. In early 1965, Giancana was called before two grand juries, and he took the fifth both times. The third time he was called, he was granted immunity, which meant that he had to start answering questions or risk a perjury charge or contempt of court, which could land him in jail for up to 18 months. One FBI agent commented, if he lied, we could get him for perjury. If he told the truth, his associates would get him. Giancana kept his mouth shut, and on June 1st, he appeared before Judge William Campbell, who told him, you have the key to your own cell, then sent him to jail. With Giancana locked away, Accardo revoked his lease on the throne and replaced him with a changing cast of characters that included confidants Paul the Waiter Rica, Salvatore Sam Battaglia, and Giuseppe Joey Dubs Awupa. After a year in prison, Giancana was set free. He hit the streets on Memorial Day 1966. If he was expecting a welcoming party, he was gravely disappointed. Within days of his release, he was called in by Accardo, who told him that he was finished as boss. Accardo then broke him down to a soldier in order to extinguish any lingering aspirations of a triumphant return. Rather than endure the humiliations of a demoted mobster while facing more grand juries, Giancana retired to Mexico City, where he temporarily took up residence in a fully staffed multi-room hotel suite before he moved to a private estate. From his new home base in Mexico City, Giancana traveled the world, opening casinos in exotic places and operating gambling ships that roamed international waters. Once again, he began dating glamorous women, the real pleasure of his life. While Johnny Roselli was discussing Giancana with another mobster, Roselli said Giancana was having a ball. He's been to Europe, the Middle East, thinking of getting an apartment in Beirut, one in Paris, and planning a trip to Africa. Giancana told Roselli, I'm enjoying this new life. Let the cocksuckers back there knock each other off anytime they want. Who cares? The president of Mexico began to care what U.S. prosecutors decided to call, or when they decided to call Giancana before more grand juries, and pressured the Mexican president to deport him. In late July 1974, Mexican authorities took Giancana into custody and ejected him from the country, from the U.S.-Mexican border. He was put on a plane and flown to Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, where FBI agents were awaiting his return. One agent who had tailed Giancana for years said of the 66-year-old, once dapper Don, who now wore cube-heeled boots, bell-bottom pants, and a salt and pepper goatee, he was undoubtedly the wealthiest person on that plane, but he looked like some Italian immigrant landing at Ellis Island, destitute and frail. The agent called him a shadow of the great godfather. The real Chicago godfather, Anthony Accardo, did not view Giancana as a shadow, but saw him as a real threat who was once again creating a new wave of real publicity. Unlike the old days in Chicago, Giancana no longer had his own social club and now conducted his street business from his Oak Park home or on the move, usually inside luncheonettes and restaurants. After seeing that Giancana was back in the swing of things, Accardo demanded a full accounting of Giancana's overseas income and assets. Giancana balked. He felt that everything he had created outside the country belonged to him alone. This defiance would have been enough for Accardo to whack Giancana, but what really melted the last layer of thin ice under Giancana's platform boots was his scheduled appearance before the church committee, which wanted to question him about the Kennedy assassination. On the evening of June 19th, 1975, Giancana invited guests to his house for dinner. The dinner party included his youngest daughter, Francine, son-in-law Jerry De Palma, and mobsters Charles Chucky English Inglesia and Dominique Butch Blassie. The party arrived at 7 p.m. and broke up before 10 p.m., at which time a police unit surveilling the house watched Chucky English and Butch Blassie leave together. Not long afterward, the same cops saw Butch Blassie return to the house, park his car in the driveway, and walk inside. The cops reasoned that Blassie had returned to discuss mob business that could not have been talked about in the presence of Giancana's daughter. They left their stake out position and took a spin past Anthony Accardo's house to see what the big tuna was up to. Accardo's Around midnight, Giancana lit up the stovetop and started to cook a meal considered an Italian favorite: sausage, escarole, garlic, and beans. Oh, thank you, Jerry. He was frying it up in a pan when Blassie crept up behind him and raised a 22 caliber pistol with silencer to the back of his head. The first bullet cut a path through Giancana's brain, sending him to the kitchen floor. Blassie leaned down and squeezed off 6 more rounds under Giancana's chin. The pistola had a 10-shot clip. It is likely that Blassie had saved 3 bullets in case someone got in his way as he made his exit. Blassie searched Giancana's wallet for any clues relating to his grand jury testimony or his rackets abroad. He then threw the wallet a few feet away from Giancana's body, not even bothering to take the wad of $1,429 in cash. While driving away from the house, Blassie tossed the murder weapon, which was found nearby. Later on, Blassie, described by Giancana's daughter Antoinette as a man my father trusted, more than anyone else, bragged to associates that he had whacked Giancana on Accardi's orders, but he was never charged with the crime, even though a police unit had watched him return to the house alone. And there was reported to be a 24-hour federal surveillance unit watching him as well. Antoinette said that the home's caretaker saw both cars leave at the same time, adding, I believe they were ordered off the property. Johnny Roselli was a guest at the Watergate Hotel when his attorney, Leslie Scher, told him that Giancana had been murdered. He wasn't shocked, said Scher, likely because Roselli had already heard about it or anticipated it, probably both. Church Committee staff investigator David Bushong, who had just lost one of his two mafia witnesses, said, it was clear to me that Roselli was the only live witness. I wanted him on record, and I wanted him quick. Bouchon scheduled Roselli to appear on June 24th, the first Tuesday after Giancana's death. Senators Frank Church, Barry Goldwater, Walter Mondale, and others were aware of the target on Roselli's back when they asked Capitol Police to escort him to the Capitol building through a back door. The closed session was held in a windowless chamber where Roselli enthralled his audience with a fully detailed description of the CIA mafia plots to kill Castro. Senator Goldwater was amazed at Roselli's recollection of facts that meshed with the testimony of FBI and CIA agents who regularly referred to notes in lieu of memory. Goldwater asked Roselli if he kept a written record, to which Roselli replied, Senator, in my business, we don't take notes. When Senator Schweiker from Pennsylvania delved into the Kennedy assassination, Roselli was careful, denying any insider knowledge. When questioned about Trafficante, he only revealed the Florida Don's role as a Spanish interpreter for the CIA's mission to assassinate Castro. In September, Roselli appeared before the committee again and was asked about the Kennedy assassination. He denied knowing anything more than 200 million other Americans who held different views as to what happened in Dealey Plaza. When asked, Roselli also denied having any knowledge of why Giancana was murdered. After the hearings were concluded, Roselli returned to his sister's home in Plantation, Florida, and resumed his quiet life. But the man whose business card simply read strategist had committed an abysmal failure in strategic thinking. Trafficante was disturbed by Roselli's appearances, and Roselli was well within Trafficante's reach in Florida. In conversations with Los Angeles mobster Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, who considered Roselli an early mentor, Roselli expressed regret that he, Giancana, and Trafficante had blown the hit on Castro and called into question Trafficante's loyalty to the plot, saying he was probably reporting everything to Castro's agents. And Miami's full of them. Roselli also ridiculed the bosses in Chicago, admitting that his relationship with Arcano was piss poor, while blaming it on a jealous rivalry that dated back to the Capone days. Fratiano asked Roselli if he was concerned about the articles that outed him as a leaker. Did Joe Batters ever mention the cola? Asked Fratiano. Not a word. Christ, said Fratiano, that's a relief. Maybe he don't know about it. Oh, don't worry. He goddamn well knows. What can he do about it? Sam and Santo were involved, and I was just following orders. In a moment of bitter resignation, Roselli told Fratiano, there's nothing you can do when bosses turn on you. That's the trouble with this thing of ours. I'll retire. I've made my contribution. The least they can do is let me live the remaining years in peace. So that's why I'm down here in Miami. Plantation was just north of Miami, where Roselli often met with Fratiano. Unable to make amends with the bosses on Earth, Roselli wanted to make peace with the big boss above. In the summer of 1976, he visited his friend, Father Joseph Clark, and made a confession. A sacrament which, if honest and forthright, should have taken Roselli weeks to complete and ended with Clark receiving treatment for PTSD. On the morning of July 28th, 1976, Roselli slept in the lounge, or slept in, then lounged by the pool while reading the newspaper. His sister Edith made him brunch before he showered and dressed in a pink silk shirt and blue pants. Just before 1 p.m., the sun-tanned, silver-haired wise guy drove away from the house in his sister's 1975 silver Chevy Impala with his golf clubs in the trunk. His first stop was a marina where he met with two fellow mobsters who invited him on a leisurely yacht ride on the calm waters of the Intercoastal. As the yacht pushed off, Roselli was sipping a cocktail on the aft deck. Later that evening, his sister, Edith, became concerned when she did not hear from him. Her husband, Joe, recalled Roselli once saying, if I'm ever missing, check the airports, because that's where they usually leave the car. On Saturday morning, Joe Daigle drove to Miami International Airport and cruised around the parking garage until he spotted the silver Impala and wondered if Roselli was in the trunk. The aeronautical engineer, who must have felt like he had been thrust into a gangster movie, opened the trunk with trepidation, but found only golf clubs. On the morning of August 7, 1976, three fishermen in their early 20s decided to try their luck in Miami's Dumbfoundling Bay. As one young man cast his line in the water, he noticed a 55-gallon steel drum bobbing along the water's edge. Thick chains encircled the drum as though Harry Houdini had used it for an escape act. The curious young man walked along the embankment until he was standing directly above the floating drum and could see crudely made gashes in its steel. He leaned down to look inside one of the holes and noticed a pink shirt before he was blasted with the stench of death. He recoiled in horror, then he yelled to his buddies, who ran off and called the police. A short while later, a police helicopter was circling above the bay as a police team hoisted the drum out of the water and placed it into a flatbed truck. Police scuba divers dropped into the water to have a look around and confirmed that the bay's only regurgitated meal was already on its way to the Dade County Medical Examiner, who removed the wet corpse for a closer inspection. The legs had been sawed off at the thighs and placed alongside the torso. A washcloth was stuffed into the mouth before adhesive tape was wrapped tightly around the head, holding the gag in place. A rope was knotted around the neck, and the bloated face was grotesquely twisted into a frozen grin. Jeez. The coroner believed the cause of death to be asphyxiation, but the victim was also stabbed and shot before his torso was sliced open from neck to navel. Between the open chest cavity, the heavy chains that encircled the drum, and the crude gashes in its steel, it was presumed that the victim's killers wanted him to sink to the bottom of the bay and remain there forever. But the gases trapped inside of his decomposing body launched him to the surface like a cork. The medical examiner believed that this was because the victim suffered from emphysema, which forms pockets of air in the upper body and carried the corpse to the surface. In time, had the young fisherman not found him, the gases would have been expelled from the body and the drum would have returned to the bottom. Detectives checked a list of missing persons while the corpse's soggy thumb was fingerprinted, which confirmed that the victim was 71-year-old Johnny Roselli. After the gruesome discovery of Roselli's mutilated body was reported in the news, there was a clamor of accusations that the CIA had killed Roselli to shut him up, forcing CIA Director William Colby to issue a public denial, saying, "I can guarantee you that the CIA had nothing to do with his death." FBI Director Clarence Kelly said he could not investigate Roselli's murder for lack of federal jurisdiction. The Washington Post pointed out that the FBI could have easily found cause to step in, hinting that the Bureau was quite satisfied with the permanent gag in Roselli's mouth. The Church Committee had already been disbanded, but senators on the Select Committee on Intelligence prodded U.S. Attorney General Edward Levi to pursue an investigation into Roselli's death in order to protect the integrity of congressional witnesses. Levi initially resisted, then succumbed to political pressure and directed the FBI to investigate, which they did with indifference. Although no one was ever arrested for Roselli's murder, a mafia informant told the FBI that the frail retiree was sipping a drink when a garrote was slipped around his neck from behind. As he gasped for air, a rag was stuffed into his open mouth. The informant said that the older mobster, suffering from emphysema, barely struggled, since Roselli's frail frame could have easily been folded into the drum. The sawing off of his legs meant that he had been left lying around for a while and became stiff as rigor mortis set in. His legs were sawed off before he was placed in the drum, for the same reason we break raw spaghetti so it fits in the pot. Okay. Several underworld informants pointed to Trafficante as the man responsible for the hit on Roselli. One of Trafficante's soldiers, Sam Cagnina, bragged about killing Roselli, which confirmed the reports. Since Roselli belonged to the Chicago mob, Trafficante would have had to clear it with acting boss Joey Dubs Ayupa, who was overheard saying, "Trafficante had the job and he messed it up," meaning Roselli's body was discovered when it was meant to disappear forever. Jack Anderson, whose column likely contributed to the hit on Roselli, wrote after he was killed, Roselli may have taken the secret of the John Kennedy assassination with him to his death. It would now depend on the House Select Committee on Assassinations to see if that were true. In 1976, the House of Representatives voted to establish the House Select Committee on Assassinations to investigate the death of President John F. Kennedy and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was also murdered in mysterious circumstances in April 1968. Interestingly, Bill and Rosalie Banana were traveling from New York to California when they heard a radio news report of the Reverend Dr. King's assassination. Bill immediately turned to his wife and said, "You see, he was getting too powerful and the government had to cut him down." Bill's immediate response to the tragedy is now widely believed by most Americans. The committee's first chief counsel was Richard Sprague, a Philadelphia prosecutor who directed much of his investigative resources toward the CIA, which spooked a few people in Washington, so Congress replaced him with the more reliable G. Robert Blakey, a 41-year-old Cornell law professor who had once worked in Bobby Kennedy's organized crime section. Blakey, like Jim Garrison before him, believed that President Kennedy was the victim of a conspiracy and that more than one shooter was involved. Blakey differed with Garrison as to who the conspirators were. Blakey was inclined to lean more toward the mafia and thought that Garrison had conducted a sham investigation designed to throw the scent off Carlos Marcello. The House Select Committee subpoenaed Marcello to appear before a secret executive session under a grant of immunity. Oh, thank you, Rob. The 68-year-old mob boss denied any involvement in the assassination of President Kennedy, but admitted to working closely with David Ferrie on his 1963 trial defense. When questioned about a large sum of money he had given to Ferrie following the assassination, Marcello claimed that it was recompense for Ferrie's trial services. Marcello was not asked about Lee Harvey Oswald, a strange omission given that Oswald lived with and worked for Marcello's bookmaker, Charles Dutz Moret, and that a number of witnesses had seen Oswald in the company of Ferrie, placing Marcello one person removed from the president's alleged assassin. During one telling exchange, Blakey noted how angry Marcello became when questioned about his illegal deportation to Guatemala at the hands of Bobby Kennedy. Generally, his answers were in curt monosyllables. Blakey later wrote, but when the subject of his deportation came up, the atmosphere in the hearing room turned tense. Marcello showed fire in his eyes and resentment in the tone of his voice. Almost incredibly, FBI agent Regis Kennedy, whose turf was New Orleans, testified that he still believed Marcello was a tomato salesman. The committee did an excellent job of tracing Jack Ruby's extensive mafia connections, something the Warren Commission had neglected to do. They subpoenaed Dallas underboss Joe Campisi, who dined with Ruby on the night before the assassination and had visited Ruby in jail after Ruby killed Oswald. When questioned, Campisi openly admitted to knowing Ruby as well as Joe Civello, and Carlos Marcello, but he stopped there, denying any knowledge of a conspiracy to kill the president. Santo Trafficante was called before the committee. This time, he did not take off for Costa Rica. When the servers showed up with a subpoena at Trafficante's house in Miami, the Florida Don appeared at the screen door and said, "Shove it under the door." Trafficante was ordered to bring all documents relating to the attempts on Fidel Castro's life and the assassination of President Kennedy. Needless to say, Trafficante brought nothing with him and invoked his Fifth Amendment's right to remain silent after he insisted on having an open hearing as opposed to a closed session. He did not want anyone in the underworld wondering what he might have said behind closed doors. He was called back under a grant of immunity, forcing him to testify or go to jail. Trafficante bobbed and weaved under questioning. He mm, he admitted to working with Roselli and the CIA in a plot to assassinate Castro, which was arguably patriotic, but denied any involvement in a conspiracy to assassinate the presidents. Trafficante's attorney, Frank Regana, described his testimony as a recital of evasive answers. Regano described his testimony. Yeah. Jose Alman appeared before the committee in a closed session where he reaffirmed his September 1962 report to the FBI, which he stated that Trafficante had expressed foreknowledge of the president's assassination, which shocked Alman after it came to pass. When Alman was called back for a public session, his story changed. Although Alman reiterated Trafficante's comments that the president was going to be hit, he now altered his understanding of it, claiming that Trafficante had only meant that Kennedy would be hit by a lot of votes from the Republican Party in the upcoming election. The committee was stunned by his revised interpretation of the event. Later, in private, Elman confessed to the committee's incredulous staff that he was terrified of Trafficante and feared for his life. Alman left the hearing room certain that he was a marked man, but Trafficante let him live, choosing to ostracize him instead. At the behest of Trafficante, none of Elman's Florida business associates, both Cuban and Italian, dealt with him or his family. Completely isolated, the once wealthy son of Cuba's former education minister quickly sank into financial ruin. His fortune was removed by Trafficante's invisible hand. He suffered a nervous breakdown and moved into a tiny bungalow with members of his extended family. On the morning of August 1st, 1983, Alman woke up penniless, depressed, and convinced the mafia was out to kill him when he shot to death his elderly aunt, injured three cousins, including a 6-year-old child, exchanged gunfire with a SWAT team, then placed the muzzle of his gun to his temple and blew his brains out. One of Alman's surviving relatives told the police or the press that Alman believed he and his family were on a mafia hit list. The cunning, ever-plotting Trafficante had somehow managed to have Alman fulfill a contract on himself. After interviewing approximately 5,000 people and deposing 300 witnesses, G. Robert Blakey concluded that organized crime had a hand in the assassination of President Kennedy. The committee believed that Marcello was the driving force behind the president's assassination, while Trafficante and Jimmy Hoffa were his main accomplices. Blakey also said that the murder of Oswald by Jack Ruby had all the earmarks of an organized crime hit, an action to silence the assassin so he could not reveal the conspiracy. We also concluded, wrote Blakey, that Ruby had been in contact with organized crime or with organized crime figures before and after the assassination. And we discovered evidence that organized crime figures were present during at least part of his trial for the murder. Blakey reluctantly admitted that rogue elements of the CIA, acting either on their own or in concert with members of organized crime, might have been involved. He drew the same conclusions with regard to members of the Cuban exile community. The FBI was cleared of having any active role in the conspiracy, but the Bureau's blatant negligence leading up to the assassination was called into question. Blakey criticized the Secret Service for not doing all they could to protect the president, but gave them a pass as well. This conflicted with Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry, who wrote a book in which he directed much of the blame at the Secret Service, specifically Winston Lawson, who arrived in Dallas on November 12th, 10 days before the assassination. Chief Curry said the Dallas Police Department carefully carried out the security plans, which were led laid out by Mr. Lawson, the Secret Service primary planner of all the security arrangements. Chief Curry further said that Mr. Lawson was in command and had directed the security arrangements in every detail. What were those details? To start with, Winston Lawson told his men to leave the top off, meaning Secret Service agents were ordered to remove the protective bubble top from the president's limousine. Bubble top. Agents Clint Hill and Jack Reddy were told not to stand on the limousine's rear riding steps. Hill's large frame would have obstructed a clean shot from either the school book depository where Lee Harvey Oswald worked or the Dow Tex building where Eugene Hale Brading was taken into custody. Furthermore, Chief Curry said that Winston Lawson laid out the planned number of vehicles in the parade and their relative order, adding that Mr. Lawson felt that 8 motorcycles around the president's vehicle were too many. Instead, he stated that he thought 2 motorcycles on either side would be sufficient and that they should be about even with the rear fender of the president's car, as opposed to riding alongside the car, which could have interfered with the shot from the grassy knoll. The other 4 motorcycles that would normally encircle the limousine were sent to the rear of the motorcade far away from the action. The press vehicle, which was loaded with professional photographers who knew how to snap pictures, Was supposed to be 2 cars behind the presidential limousine, but was bumped to the rear without an explanation. Dallas police were told to stand with their backs to the crowd, making it impossible to spot suspicious persons. And the police crowd detail was deliberately ended 1 block short of the kill zone on Elm Street. The 99-degree turn onto Elm Street was a last-minute change made by the Secret Service that slowed the presidential limousine to a crawl, making Kennedy an easy target with a canyon of high buildings all around him. Chief Curry wrote that the security detail or the security was comparatively light along the short stretch of Elm Street where the president was shot. It seems a freak of history that this short stretch of Elm Street would be the assassination site, and that the Texas Book Depository building was virtually ignored in the security plans for the motorcade. It is apparently what Curry is telling us, that whoever ordered these strange changes was either involved in the conspiracy or controlled by men who were involved. In all fairness to Winston Lawson, it seems he was following orders from a higher power. He told the Warren Commission that to have the motorcade ride through the more dangerous downtown area was wanted back in Washington, D.C. The president's longtime secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, wrote, "Our own advance man urged that the motorcade not take the route through the underpass and past the book depository." But he was overruled. By whom? Who exactly was Lawson and Lincoln referring to? Perhaps it was Secret Service agent in charge, Gerald Benn, who had been the head of the presidential detail since Kennedy's inauguration. In the 3 years since Kennedy was elected, Ben had never left the president's side, traveling everywhere with him, and during the motor during motorcades, always sitting in the front passenger seat directly in front of Kennedy. However, when the shots rang out at Dealey Plaza, Ben was sitting at his desk in the East Wing of the White House. Ben supposedly took a vacation, excusing him from the trip to Texas. Then, on second thought, decided to go to work at his office in Washington, calling the shots throughout the trip. Without the many puzzling changes that resulted in a lack of security around the president, the perfect hit could never have happened. For example, when agent Ron Pontius could not believe that his fellow agents were prohibited from riding on the back steps of the presidential limousine. He called Ben in Washington and asked if it was true. Ben answered, "That's right." Then added, "Tell the agents not to be too overzealous in crowding the president." When Pontius hung up the phone, another agent, Bert DeFries, who was listening in on the conversation, commented, "Ben was not sacked or asked to resign, but became special agent in charge of President Johnson's detail." And Lawson was rewarded for the many inexcusable failures on his watch with a cushy, high paying job at the Department of Defense. After losing a president, neither man should have been trusted to walk someone's dog. Yeah. Lawson himself said, "I'm the only agent in history of the Secret Service that had the President of the United States killed and an Urbanus Edmund Bauman, a longtime Secret Service chief who retired in 1961, called Ben's actions into question, stopping just shy of accusing him of complicity." After President Kennedy was dead, the Secret Service wrested his body away from the Dallas County medical examiner, Dr. Earl Rose, who had every lawful right to perform an autopsy. Kennedy O'Donnell, who was present with Secret Service agents described a tense standoff with foul language, and this doubled when Dr. Rose did not get out of our way. A judge was called to mediate the dispute and said that Kennedy's body must remain in Dallas, stating, as far as I'm concerned, it's just another homicide case. O'Donnell said, we shoved Dr. Rose aside before the Secret Service stole off with the corpse. I was sure the medical examiner and the police would follow us to the airport and try to stop us from putting the casket on the plane, said O'Donnell. I kept looking back to see if any police cars were coming and telling the others to hurry. The stolen corpse was taken to the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, where many believe an autopsy was performed in order to hide the real results and thus the true direction of the bullet that ended Kennedy's life. The bloody presidential limousine with brain tissue on the seats and floorboards was also treated strangely. Time magazine reporter Hugh Sidey said a guard was set up around the Lincoln as Secret Service men got a pail of water and tried to wash the blood from the car. This rolling piece of physical evidence that should have never been tampered with was then driven back to Love Field, placed on a cargo plane, and flown to Washington, where it was quickly and inexplicably repaired and reupholstered, destroying any remaining evidence. It is quite apparent to anyone without blinders on that whatever the mob was able to contribute to the death of President Kennedy, they could not have succeeded or gotten away with it without an elite government cabal making the decisions noted above. Even the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, confirmed to be a mob hit by G. Robert Blakey, and Jim Garrison, seems to have been guided by the parties each man was out to protect. Garrison pointed the finger at the CIA while pretending La Cosa Nostra was the name of an Italian restaurant, and Blakey laid the blame on the mafia while carefully tiptoeing around the federal government. Judging from their most conspicuous omissions, it becomes quite apparent that the natural inquisitiveness that should have guided each of their investigations was curtailed by invisible hands that guided each investigator. The truth, it seems, does not lie in one conclusion or the other, but in the overlap. If the mob and the government work together in a plot to kill Fidel Castro, why then should it shock us that they work together to take out who they believed was another mutual enemy? Dun dun dun. That's the end of the last chapter. Let's do the epilogue. It's very short. When Joe Valachi became a snitch and went before Congress, his testimony did not lead to any major takedowns across the country, but the underworld still wanted him dead. Concerned that his betrayal of La Cosa Nostra would spark a trend resulting in a flood of informants. Fortunately for the mob, their fears were unfounded, and snitching would not become trendy until, after a curious lapse of 30 years, a Gambino family underboss went sour in 1999, or 1991, prompting other mobsters to follow in his footsteps. In the interim, there were a few exceptions, like New England mobster Vincent Fat Vinny Teresa, who became a snitch in December of 1969. Teresa ended up in the rat suit suites at La Tuna Penitentiary in Texas, where he met inmate Joe Valachi, who was living out the remainder of his life in fear. Joe wouldn't even come, thank you, Jerry, near me or talk to me, said Teresa. He was scared stiff, and he was convinced that I was there to kill him. After Teresa told Valachi that he was convinced I was there to kill him, or that he too was an informant and had no interest in killing him, the two men hit it off and became fast friends. But Valachi's paranoia mm, never ceased. Once, while the two inmates were sunning themselves in the prison yard, and a small airplane flew overhead, Teresa said that Valachi was convinced that the plane carried a hitman who was going to shoot us. Teresa, who was not only an efficient killer but also a big earner, may have unwittingly revealed the root of Valachi's bitterness toward Vito Genovese, which never waned even years later. According to Teresa, whenever they reminisced about the old days, Valachi only talked about murders he had committed. When Teresa asked Valachi to stop talking about contracts and to talk about making money, Valachi replied, "How can I talk about making money, Vinny? I never made any." Valachi's reply makes it apparent that Genovese had only used Valachi to kill people, and Valachi blamed his own lack of earning power on his boss. Valachi was bitter about a lot of things, said Teresa. He kept saying over and over that Bobby Kennedy had promised him he would get out of jail, but it was all a snow job. Valachi died a lonely, miserable death inside prison on April 1971, outliving Bobby, whose crusade against the mafia was stopped by Carlos Marcello. In the years following the Kennedy assassination, many of Carlos Marcello's suspected co-conspirators either turned up murdered or were found dead under mysterious circumstances. In 1980, Louisiana Don, who was still riding high and had never been convicted of a major crime in 5 decades, became the target of an FBI sting. Agents broke into Marcello's private office, still at the nondescript town and country motel, and planted a microphone in the ceiling above his desk. They then posed as insurance salesmen, offering Marcello generous bribes in return for state contracts. By 1981, the 71-year-old Marcello was indicted. On the tapes that were entered into evidence, the mafia don who doubled as a power broker openly admitted openly admitted his grasp over blocks of voters, public officials, politicians, and union leaders. According to the Des Moines Tribune, the recordings cut through the shroud of secrecy surrounding Marcello, one of the most secretive crime bosses in the United States. The article entrenched the country and went to on to say, if the tapes are to be believed, Marcello's influence on state government is pervasive. He is a man with clout, publicly shunned but privately courted by campaign fundraisers and businessmen in search of public work. For years, political candidates have sought Marcello's support, said one attorney involved in the case, which also netted such characters as the Louisiana Commissioner of Administration, as well as a former top aide to the Louisiana governor and the high-powered Washington lobbyist Irving Davidson, whose clientele included the CIA. A follow-up indictment stemming from the same sting charged the Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives with similar pay-for-pay crimes. As in the Kennedy assassination plot, it seems that Marcello felt immune from prosecution when partnering with people in the highest circles of government, unaware that the feds had undergone a monumental change in attitude and were not averse, at least in some cases, to taking down state officials and their mafia cronies. The indictment, which casts Marcello as the mastermind of the conspiracy, came as a shock to the old Don, who received support from pillars of the community who were quick to attest to the good character and charity of the loving father of 4 children who doted on his 10 grandchildren. During the laborious process of choosing a jury, prospective jurors were asked what came to mind when they heard the name Marcello. Over and over, the replies were the Mafia and the Godfather. The Chinese American sheriff of Jefferson Parish said of Marcello, "He doesn't look much like Marlon Brando," referring to the actor who played Don Corleone in The Godfather, which was released a decade after President Kennedy's assassination. But even if Marcello's short, pudgy build and grandfatherly features did not resemble Marlon Brando, Marcello's raspy voice on the tapes sounded very much like that of Don Corleone, as Marcello revealed his unlimited reach into the darkest and dirtiest rooms of Louisiana politics. When a jury was finally chosen and the trial began, United States Attorney John Volz told the courtroom that Marcello was convicted on only one count of the 12-count indictment and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Oh, it's already 8:04. Okay. I just have like 1 page left, but I'll finish that tomorrow and do the new book. I did not mean to keep you waiting. I'm so sorry. Ow, my foot hurts. Um, my back tonight is also hurting. Look at the bottom of my lips that came off my coffee. I'm gonna show you. Let's see what it looks like. My back tonight is hurting, and I don't know. I was cleaning a couple of books out today, but I don't know if that's what caused it or maybe the overall pain, like tension spread. But I'm just trying to like stretch my back. I'm sorry. I'll be okay. I'll put on like my back brace or something. We've wrapped it like a million times, but I'm gonna clean it again and wrap it. I don't know if you can see where that is. You see the blood, but I don't know if you can. Let's see. What do we say? Can I show that? I think so. It's not okay. It's right here. It's right down here is where it got. So yeah, I'll clean that again. It's okay. All right, guys. I love you so much. Oh, thank you, Jerry. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll try not to hurt myself in the meantime. Fingers crossed. Look at this. She hung out with me the whole time, and that's sweet. Feel All right. Good night.